Winter 2015 has been a very enjoyable season for myself. It had a lot of the variables I look for when I'm watching anime. I've had something to talk about almost every single week. Shows that have really impressed me and shows that have been really challenging to watch. My opinions have kind of somersaulted throughout the season, changing on an almost weekly basis. But now things have settled, I'm ready to list my top 5 shows of the season. At number 5 on the list is Ajin. It was almost completely glanced over by the community, probably for its heavy use of CG animation and uninviting aroma. Although it's an action-packed, twist-heavy drama series, it doesn't really show that off. The series is very monochrome both aesthetically and thematically. It didn't over-exaggerate its drama and maintained a fairly raw sense of tension. Although the plot is very extreme, the series felt very balanced and character behaviour felt somewhat natural. The story did lend itself to being a bit too frantic at points. It could have benefited from some downtime every now and again, but that did keep the pace up, which was essential for such a cramped story. We can't really discuss Ajin without discussing the CG animation, and at first I thought it was a great decision. It clearly opened up doors for scenes that wouldn't have been possible with 2D TV production. The heavy use of vehicle scenes and fast action called for some sort of 3D help, and it worked in its favour. But as the series went on, I started to become very weary of the animation. Too much of it became repetitive and many shots seemed out of place. I felt a bit disconnected with the story sometimes because of the awkward looking stances and facial expressions. Overall, I think Ajin deserves credit for its fairly exciting storyline and partly successful use of tricky animation. Unfortunately, it didn't do enough to stamp its personality into me, so it ended up falling quite short. Dimension W is number 4. My first impressions of the series will be completely contradictory to my final impressions. Dimension W introduced itself as a sci-fi series set to explore politics in its world and offer a unique futuristic perspective. The first few episodes continued this trend, but it slowly started to steer off in the opposite direction. Thankfully, the other direction was probably the more realistic route. It transacted into a lighter and more episodic adventure series, tackling many different story styles along the way. For me, this change may have cut off the potential as a complete series, but I enjoyed what they created. Having the colourful cast of characters go through small but engaging mini-stories was surprisingly entertaining. The stories were short enough to not overstretch their reach, but offered enough content to allow the viewer to care. It was a bit silly at points, and the stories were almost always very basic, but the show had personality. Although lacklustre in their depth, the characters felt like characters, and the world felt alive. It was never going to make that much of an impact, but considering where it could have gone, I'm perfectly happy with how it turned out. Bakumachi is number 3, a series that started off being one of the most interesting shows of the season with its more subtle drama and addictive narrative. The supernatural elements got in the way with the story, and it had some awful writing at points. Lots of almost laughable decisions by characters didn't help the immersion at all, and plot points were just glazed over sometimes. That's not to say the series completely crashed though. Bakumachi done a very good job of keeping me interested throughout the series. Even when there was a 2 or 3 episode dip, they still had enough basic drama to keep me invested in the overall story. Its strongest quality was probably the directing. For the most part, it was subtle enough to blend in, but prominent enough to add sufficient symbolism where other elements of the narrative strayed away. Character emotion and gestures were focused on, and the visual imagery mirrored the story. This mixed with the early promises of the narrative offered a very compelling drama, though the series falls down majorly towards the middle. As its more complicated narrative elements and supernatural aspects were explained, holes and imbalances started to arise. Many aspects of the story were left unconnected and plot points were raised that shouldn't have been issues. A lot of the time I was left uninterested when a character chose to ignore an obvious choice to pick something more dramatic. This lack of immersion caused by messy writing was what pushed me away from the series. It's hard to really get invested into a set of characters when borderline parody plot points were being used. Most of them are spoilers, so I can't really mention specifics, but the show would have greatly improved with the implementation of smoother and more basic story elements. At its core, it's a drama mystery series. Staying basic and not introducing too many strands of story is important. You can't handle more than 1 or 2 without seeming silly. I mean, come on. A man being left by his wife over a chocolate bar. You guys can do better than that. Grimgar only slightly makes the number 2 spot. I was really having a hard time picking between this and Bakumachi. Where that had a stronger start and a weak progression, Grimgar done the opposite. Like the aforementioned series, Grimgar was a rollercoaster of opinions for me. One scene I'd love how raw and touching the drama was, another I'd be struggling to watch the cringy dialogue about breasts that immediately followed emotional scenes. A very interesting series, but it didn't make me liking it an easy task. The series got off to a really terrible start. The premise did it no favours. The first episode was completely out of beat with the rest of of the series and annoying moments showing off unfitting fan service plagued early scenes. But although having already lost most people's attention, the series does start to develop a personality. It strays from the atmosphere of its first few episodes and focuses more on the effective parts of its world, almost rendering the premise in its first few episodes obsolete. Although you might get the impression that the story is all about the world and the larger narrative, it's not. It created a sort of non-progressive, character-driven story, using its hopeless characters as its main focus. This is where the series shines, its ability to portray character emotion. Like I said, a lot of this was ruined by ending each scene with template comedy or fan service, but when it stuck to its guns, it's a very immersive and moving drama series. To be honest, I think it could have largely benefited from a simplification. A lot of the series was completely pointless in the grand scheme and ended up hindering its more intricate details. I didn't really care about the guilds or clans from its world, I cared about the harsh character drama within its group. Unfortunately, these moments were far and few between. Grimgar and Bakumachi are similar in that their strengths are buried under layers and layers of mediocrity. But the strengths are there and they are worth digging for. And in the number 1 spot goes to Shouwa Genroku. The rest of this list was kind of close together, but this series was untouchable compared to anything else that's aired this season. A drama series with a perfect understanding of its own path, woven together beautifully with a palette of perfectly executed elements. It tells a story rich with diversity, showing off every aspect of its narrative in a concise time frame, conveying its elements with equal weight, which paced the series beautifully to build on every episode, improving with each scene to create a gorgeous narrative arc. This is probably the show's strongest element, as hard as that is to decide on. Its ability to seamlessly jump between the different aspects of its story without breaking cohesion was spectacular. Not only did the individual streams of its story achieve, but coming together they created something so immersive and powerful. It's the richness of what was produced that makes this series so special. The subtle but layered imagery, the characters brimming with colour, the fantastically connected storyline. Individually they were great, but together they moulded such a gorgeous final product. The consistency it achieved was so valuable, not something many series do. They knew exactly what they wanted to achieve with the story, and with the right characters, technique and structure they managed to pull it off beautifully. Everything was completely believable, an aspect everything else this season was missing. And I'm not talking about logic or plausibility, I'm talking about the story being a believable tale, being one that the viewer can immerse themselves into without having to worry about decisions or plot twists. Everything flowed so naturally together without any hiccups. The directing, although not instantly noticeable, becomes one of the most important parts of the series. During the early stages of the story, the directing is subtle, focusing on smart compositions and character interaction, but as the series progresses, the drama gets more and more complicated, and the directing mimics this, moving to more surreal and symbolic shots. Close-ups of faces, obscure angles, the directing visually flows with the pacing of the drama, moulding everything together into one compact narrative. Shouwa Genroku is undeniably the best series of the season, showcasing perfectly how to have a powerful narrative without having an overcomplicated plot. The effective use of subtlety and how that can elevate a narrative is shown here with outstanding results. Without a doubt one of the most creative and effective shows of the last year. I think it's safe to say this was one of the most interesting seasons we've had in a while. A number of shows that offered a lot of critical discussion, and Shouwa Genroku that became one of the most impressive shows of the last couple of years. So how does it stack up to other recent seasons? And what was your top 5 of the season? Post your thoughts in the comments. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and share it around with your mates. Cheers.